a name that snaps Renaissance painting into a new, almost sculptural clarity. He carved volume from paint, turned rooms into stages, and made the human body feel both monumental and intimately observed. From the foreshortened shock of a dead Christ laid out like at your feet, to the theatrical illusionism of the camera degli Sposi, Mantegna chased a single obsession: how to make painted forms stand with the authority of carved stone and the immediacy of lived drama. He worked at the Gonzaga court in Mantua, borrowed freely from Roman antiquity, and reimagined biblical and classical stories with a crispness that still feels modern. This is an artist who taught painters to see bodies in planes and architecture as psychological scenery. He could be austere and sensuous at once, learned and surprisingly playful. Stick with me and you'll meet his masterpieces, the techniques that made them unforgettable, and the curious stories behind patrons, prints, and rivalries that shaped his career. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps us keep creating more educational videos like this one. Mantegna was born around 1431 in the Veneto, likely in Isola di Carturo, and apprenticed in Padua with the workshop of Francesco Squarcione. That training cemented his fascination with classical sculpture and measured archaeological observation. He later moved to Mantua and became the court artist for the Gonzaga family, a position that allowed him to study antiquities, build a reputation for portraiture, and refine a style of hard-edged modeling and strict linear perspective. Look at his early portraits: the crisp planes of a cardinal's face, the sharp profile studies, the sober backgrounds. Mantegna's figures often feel chiseled, a product of his love for Roman reliefs and metals. He was also closely connected to Venice by marriage into the Bellini family, which placed him at the crossroads of Northern and Italian tastes. That mix, the classical discipline of Padua, the decorative sensibility of Venice, and Mantua's princely demands, explains why his work looks like both an archaeological find and a theatrical set. Nothing demonstrates Mantegna's radical vision better than the Lamentation, often called the Dead Christ. He painted the corpse of Christ foreshortened toward the viewer, a bold, technical gambit. The legs and feet dominate the foreground while the mourners recede into a shallow plane. That shocking, almost forensic perspective forces empathy. You are at the bedside, unable to look away. Mantegna's handling is spare and tactile. The skin, the muscles, the wounds, all rendered with a sculptor's attention. This painting also sparked debate. Some contemporaries found the angle too crude, others hailed it as a technical triumph. Mantegna didn't stop at one version. There are related lamentation panels, details, and copies that show how the idea haunted him and inspired others. The work's legacy is vast. Artists centuries later still point to its daring use of perspective and emotional compression. Step inside the camera degli Sposi and you feel Mantegna the illusionist. Commissioned for the Ducal Palace in Mantua, the room reads like a painted stage whose walls dissolve into theatrical spaces and believable court scenes. Mantegna painted portrait-like figures of Gonzaga family members, scenes of courtly life, and decorative motifs that mocked and mirrored real architecture. His painted oculus tricks the eye. Children lean over balustrades, courtiers glance outward, and the ceiling suggests a sky full of movement. Here, his mastery of perspective becomes a social instrument. Portraits and everyday gestures are integrated into a larger architectural fantasy. The effect is both intimate and grand. Propaganda, family tableau, and virtuoso design all in one. Mantegna's fascination with antiquity reaches a monumental high point in The Triumphs of Caesar, a series of large tempera canvases that depict a Roman triumph as a slow, ceremonial procession. Think of gladiators, elephants, banners, picture-bearers, and men hauling treasure. Each panel is a pageant of classical costumes and carved trophies. He painted these as if documenting an actual triumph, and the results read like ancient reliefs translated into color. The series celebrates grandeur and order. It also served a courtly purpose, offering the Gonzagas a visual connection to Rome's glory. Beyond the immediate spectacle, these works reveal Mantegna's disciplined compositional rhythm. He arranges repeated forms, friezes, and motifs with an almost sculptural logic, again testing the boundary between painting and carved narrative. Religious commissions were central to Mantegna's career, but he never painted devotional images as simple pieties. Take the Madonna della Vittoria, commissioned by Francesco Gonzaga to commemorate a military victory. The Virgin appears solemn and monumental, flanked by saints, while the donor kneels in armor, a striking fusion of sacred and secular. Mantegna's altarpieces compress space, emphasize textures, the embroidery on garments, the glint of armor, the carved halos, and demand contemplation. Even in scenes of sorrow and prayer, his figures retain that sculptural dignity. They are monumental supplicants rather than sentimentalized devotees. The Madonna della Vittoria also shows his gift for integrating portrait-like donors into a sacred tableau without diminishing the spiritual narrative. Mantegna's St. Sebastian paintings reveal another side, anatomical precision and an archaeological stage. Sebastian stands amid architectural ruins, a classical backdrop full of carved fragments and broken sculpture, emphasizing martyrdom as timeless and heroic. Mantegna's trained eye renders muscles and sinew with clarity, and his architectural details display his love of inscriptions, capitals, and fragments of Roman relief. Portraiture, too, was a specialty. Commissions for cardinals, nobles, and court figures show tight, focused heads with intense presence. Look at his portrait of Cardinal Trevisan, the careful chiaroscuro, the flat, dark background, the concentrated psychological gaze. Mantegna could suggest status and character with remarkably economical means. Mantegna's small narrative panels reward close looking. His Agony in the Garden, a predella panel, offers a compressed cinematic scene. Christ prays in a rocky landscape while soldiers and Judas approach in the distance. What's fascinating are the micro-stories, a rabbit bolting through rocks, a pelican feeding her young, details of distant towns, that transform religious drama into an observed world. These landscape and animal motifs reflect northern attention to nature, yet remain tightly composed within Italian linear perspective. Mantegna's brush records textures of rock, feather, and fabric with miniature precision. These islets of observation give his grand narratives human scale and tactile reality. Mantegna was equally at home with stories from scripture and myth. His Death of the Virgin shows a funeral intimacy, a room arranged like a shallow stage, mourners gathered with carved sculptural gestures. In contrast, his Parnassus and mythological pieces draw directly from ancient poetry and iconography, populated by godlike figures, musicians, and allegorical figures. Across these works, he applies the same concerns: clear contour, measured anatomy, and an almost archaeological placement of props and ruins. Even when music-making angels or mythic figures appear, they carry the same gravity as his saints, as though all myths, heavenly or historical, are fragments of a single classical memory. Mantegna's influence radiated widely. His foreshortening exercises informed later studies in anatomy and perspective. His triumphs fed the Renaissance appetite for classical pageantry. His camera degli Sposi anticipated Baroque illusionistic ceilings. He taught through example. The sculptural modeling, the archaeological eye, and the marriage of portrait with narrative can be traced in Venetian and Northern art that followed. Critics and admirers have argued over his austerity versus his sensuousness, but perhaps that tension is the point. Mantegna forged a language that balanced discipline with invention, and in doing so altered how a painted surface could command space and emotion. Andrea Mantegna remains a painter who rewards both a quick glance and a slow, exacting look. He is the artist who made paint behave like carved stone, who turned ceiling and wall into spectacles, who treated classical ruins and private grief with equal sculptural seriousness. His career at the Gonzaga court gave him a laboratory, an audience, antiquities to study, and the commissions to experiment. If you walk away with one idea, let it be this: Mantegna taught us that painting can be architecture for the soul, that perspective can carry feeling as much as form. Explore his Lamentations, stroll through the painted court of the Camera degli Sposi, and look again at those small predella details. They're full of surprises. If you enjoyed this crash course in Mantegna, check his works in major museums and keep looking. The more you study him, the more he reveals.